All right, welcome everyone, and we are kicking off the last week of July here. Garrett, it's fascinating, it's frightening, it's certainly interesting that we started probably this last 4 or 5 weeks around business impact, and we're rounding out the month with something that we typically are thinking cyber related that would have a mass supply chain impact. But, as we talked about last week, we're talking about CrowdStrike. And this week, we're going to be talking about and looking at this through the lens of, well, gosh, who's paying for this? And specifically, if I'm an MSP, and again, this could be CrowdStrike, any endpoint, any something largely baked into your stack, that now all of a sudden you're stopping business, remediating. Let's just say you're a decent, any size MSP. Let's just make some scale out of this. So you got 100 decent sized customers, 7,000 endpoints, all running CrowdStrike. You're stop business. You're deploying your entire teams and comms to get people back up and running. You're losing money every day because you can't onboard or do professional services and do the other things you want to do.
And it's worse for your customers. You're still getting paid by your customers.
Right.
Some of those customers are not getting paid.
Right.
They're not doing whatever it is that rings the cash register. So
right.
It is worse for them than it is for you.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's bad on all sides, right? And this is what we really wanted to kind of speak about today. And there's, not only the insurance component of this, which is why we have Reid on, which we'll do our intros momentarily. But Eric, there's going to be some legal stuff happening with this whole thing. Fair? And
that's for a really long time. Yes.
Yeah. And I, when this happened, and as I spoke to Reid, leading into this, it made me think of you and how you always talk about vendor contracts, and how the majority of MSPs just sign them and have baked in that. So it's something we're going to talk about really today. And as we all know, this was a content configuration update that was a mishap. We've heard, from CrowdStrike, all of us have read about it. And so I wanted to kind of delve in today to look at, okay, what happens from here? Like Gary, you're saying, what happens with customers that have had massive business impact, the theme du jour we've been talking about. And, as an MSP, what do I do? Are there any?
Yeah, and if we have time in the end, if we have like 3 or 4 minutes at the end, I want to add a non-security kind of piece to this. Of last week, we ran our peer groups, around the world, and kind of what I was sharing about where I think we need to be, not in 2 years, but where I think we need to be in the next 6 to 12 months in terms of how we look at what our role is, even beyond security. But it's all intertwined.
Yeah, very cool. So, just so everybody knows, Phyllis is out today. She had something come up. So if there's a bit of delay and that's my question. Normally it's Phyllis's question. Just please bear with us. So welcome everyone, and let me also just hide this so I can see chat, and let's do this. All right. So stage is set. Reid, I thought you'd be really apropos to today's conversation. So let me let you introduce yourself first, and then we'll go to Mr. Tilds. Thanks for joining, Reid.
Awesome. He's been dying to use the word apropos now for weeks.
It's been on it's on the calendar, right? The words to use today.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Andrew. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. And hello, everyone. My name is Reid Wellock. I'm the president of FifthWall. Quick intro on FifthWall. We are a cyber insurance wholesaler. Been in business for since 2015. I have been a cyber insurance nerd since about 2017. So this is really my bread and butter. And our familiarity, I guess, to the space, to the channel in 2022, we did pivot the business. We started working with and through MSPs, and we kind of never looked back. We moved a lot of our business energy and operations towards the channel. We fall in love with. I'm just excited to be here. Hopefully, answer some great questions, and looking forward to. Always good to talk to you folks. But Eric, it's great to see you on as well.
Yeah, thanks, Reid. Good to see you too. And I'm Eric Tildes. I know a lot of you out there, but I am a former MSP owner. I like to say a recovering MSP owner, and an attorney. And today I'm a full-time attorney. I represent several hundred MSPs around the country. Reid and I have obviously a lot of interests in common, but also a bunch of clients in common as well. So thrilled to be here.
Awesome.
When you're an MSP and a lawyer, that's called going from the frying pan to the fire.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not sure which way is which, though.
Yeah, exactly.
All right,
Can
Gary.
you get started?
Yeah, take it away, bud.
So, Reid, let's just start here. This we're talking about today, CrowdStrike, was not a cybersecurity incident from the perspective of no bad guys involved. It looked like one, smelled like one, tasted like one, had all the pain of one, but it was not the bad guys. So the first question I have, if we talk about types of insurances, because people are going to need insurance at every level, as Andrew mentioned, where does this go?
Yeah, and we were talking earlier, and Eric made I think a really accurate comment. This would be a lot easier actually if it was a cyber incident. Right, be a lot cleaner. Not necessarily as good for the cyber insurance industry, but as far as more of a clear direction for where insureds are supposed to go. Just to kind of break it down, since this is not a typical, it is technically a cyber event, but the triggering piece of this was not, an intrusion. Right, there wasn't the quote unquote breach, but there are some coverages out there that would still come into play. And so typically when you look at this, because it wouldn't be necessarily a covered event for a cyber event, you could still look at the time. And Andrew, you and I talked about this earlier. There's kind of this direct, indirect cost that's associated. And typically when you get into that bucket and your business is essentially doing something that is, over here when you want to be here, right? It's pulling your attention, it's pulling your resources. Knee-jerk reaction from an insurance coverage perspective is going to be, okay, that's business interruption, right? But this is not a direct impact on your business. This is a result of a third party. So we go to this next layer. We go to dependent business interruption, right? Now, these coverages are on policies, they're on cyber policies today. And there's two categories that I would encourage everyone out there that's, flipping through their policy, probably more so than recently, to say what's in there. If you see dependent network interruption or dependent business interruption, dependent business interruption right now is going to have a couple different categories in it. Some insurers, they isolate it to very specific types of incidents and very specific third-party vendors, right? Most commonly, it's going to be cloud service providers and internet service providers, right? They're going to call those out by name. Some of them, though, are very broad, right? And so there is some gray area there to work with on those policies that you could say, look, this is a third-party vendor. And as a result of their downtime, I experienced business interruption. The other category is a little bit more far-fetched because we don't see this as much, and that's dependent network interruption. So for a while when the market was softening up in 22, 23, we saw carriers getting more competitive and they were expanding dependent network interruption. And it wasn't necessarily to cover this type of event, right? That's not what they were looking to do. It was more so car hit a telephone pole, knock things out. I'm down for 10, 12 hours. It's going to cover, a small period of time. How that's defined as network interruption, again, you're looking for that broad language, it's very broadly worded. But unfortunately, over probably the past 18 months, that has started to get, clawed back a bit. You're seeing not as many insurers provide that coverage. Outside of that, though, we're not really seeing anything else where this would fall into like a clear bucket. A lot of folks I'm talking to in the industry, a lot of my friends, they're kind of taking shots from the hip, right? They're doing what I just said, like, hey, based on the general verbiage of how we're seeing the language, let's go ahead and put a claim in anyway. It's a shot in the dark, right? It's not a clear cut. This applies to this specifically. So we're going to file a claim for that module.
So let's think about it in two scenarios. One is I'm an MSP. I got 50 customers and I got CrowdStrike. There's this massive impact. I have hundreds of hours. Can I submit to get reimbursed for my time?
Short answer is no. Shorter answer is we got to break this apart, and I think this will be where Eric, you're going to have some good impact. Here's let me kind of, you're the MSP right now. The indirect loss to your business right now is time and energy you're spending for remediation, getting people back up, all of that, right? Your boots on the ground.
One. Yeah, that's the first.
That's step one. Okay, so for that, there would be coverage if it was your business as an MSP that was impacted directly. If this is not for, there's not going to be coverage for your clients in the way that they're impacted, right? This is part of, how the MSP builds out their MSA and for their services. And I'm sure we'll get to this later on from a contractual standpoint. So really what this comes down to is that client better have good coverage for the hope, even though it's slim, that they can submit a claim and that they can get reimbursed for their loss of income.
Independent business interruption.
Yeah.
Right? Not cyber.
But Gary, here's what we're still left with. And I think this is a really important element that I'm sure a lot of MSPs are really anxious about is it's all about expectations and the conversations and understanding that their client has right now, right? Because either the MSP is making a decision that I'm going to bill for these things and it's expected, right, per their MSA, or are they doing this pro bono because they're not really sure how to approach the situation? They're just doing their job and trying to figure out how they're going to charge for it later. But there isn't a direct, that's why I'm saying indirect, direct. There isn't a direct component for an MSP to say, hey, look, there's insurance coverage for me in the services I'm providing, the time I'm providing to my client to get reimbursed.
Gary?
Wait, one thing, Andrew, before you jump in.
Sure.
I talked to someone last week. Not a lot of the customers I deal with have CrowdStrike in their stack. I think some bigger companies, bigger MSPs, right? But I did talk to someone yesterday who does. They're a mid-size MSP. They probably have 150 customers. And I asked them these questions. And now this is a week after, right? They do not know the answers to any of these questions yet.
Wow.
They don't know the answers. That's kind of scary, right, Reid?
Yeah, it is. And that's where we started doing exercises with Eric, right, on MSAs and how we're trying to advise MSPs on the tech E&O side. So for they, them, their business. And there's a lot to be said around just the expectations around the MSA itself, right? It kind of sets the stage for these types of, not specifically, I don't think we were really necessarily thinking of this specific type of event, but there is a lot to be said to be able to sit down.
Why weren't we? Like now in hindsight, doesn't it seem like ridiculous? Yeah. Why weren't we?
So Gary,
and why did it take so long for this to happen?
Thank goodness.
Yeah, all good questions.
Yeah.
Eric, two-part question to you. Eric's son says, well, what about cyber insurance options for hardware and software outages? I'm assuming, again, it's because it's not under cyber. That's number one, but I'll let you say that. Can you just talk to the standpoint of MSA here? Because you're the MSP who's chosen this partner. Can you kind of just unpack a little bit about that and the relationship and the contracts and things?
Yeah, and we're going to talk about this, a lot today. And it's the distinction between reselling a product versus selling a managed services that uses third-party service providers, right? And this is the latter, right? This is not, I sold you 100 Microsoft licenses, right? Here's the license, good luck. This is, I'm going to provide you EDR, right? Your customers might not even know the name CrowdStrike. It doesn't show up in your contract necessarily. EDR does, right? And you're on the hook to provide EDR to your customers. You've chosen CrowdStrike as the tool by which you're going to deliver that. But that in that situation, the latter situation, you as the MSP are on the hook to deliver that service, right? You've made the decision to go with CrowdStrike instead of any of the other, 100 EDR providers out there. And therefore, contractually, you're likely going to be somehow responsible. And that somehow is obviously on a scale, right? It depends what your contract says. And then, you guys have heard me say this 1,000 times, making sure that the bag that you're left holding as the MSP is as small as possible, because you might have some liability to your customer. Hopefully CrowdStrike might have some liability to you. Hopefully their liability to you is more than your liability to your customer, but it all depends what your contract says.
Got it. Cool. Gary, back to you.
Yeah, contracts that would normally really look. Does anybody read like CrowdStrike? I mean, I don't think anybody is going to be redlining anything in their EULA.
Well, it's not their EULA necessarily, but it's your agreement with CrowdStrike to use their services to deliver managed services to your customers, right? And every vendor that any MSP uses, they will negotiate their agreements. Some of them are going to do a kicking and screaming, right? And Andrew, we've talked about that before. Who does it freely versus who does it kicking and screaming, but they will. But I'll tell you, Gary, the troubling part, at least in my practice, right? So I represent over 300 MSPs around the country. I can probably count on less than 2 hands how many of my clients have me review all of their vendor agreements, right? They just don't. And you've heard me say it time and time again, right? You need to review and negotiate your vendor agreements. They will negotiate with you. Most of them will come up with, by the end of the day, a reasonable agreement where they will accept an appropriate amount of liability in the event something terrible like this happens, right? But not enough MSPs ask for it, right? I've never gotten anything I haven't asked for in my life, right? You have to ask for it in order for them to give it to you.
And then, so let's think about this. Now we're looking back after this happens, right? So we got hindsight, which is, I don't need my glasses when I'm looking backwards. So what are some best practices? Like you're touching on a little bit between like the MSP and the vendor contract, but also the MSP and you talk about the MSP and user contract. Of this.
So both are really, really important, right? And it's both the MSA and, I call them statements of work, whatever the business document is under which you deliver your managed services. Both are equally important, and they're equally important for when things like this happen. Because to your point a few minutes ago, whoever would have thought that something like this would happen? Maybe we all should have, right? But most people didn't, right? So instead, you generically plan for when bad things happen, right? And when bad things happen, regardless of what that bad thing is, you have to be contractually ready for it, right? You have to be able to go back to your contract and say, oh, okay, when horrible things happen, here's what my warranty says. Here's what my indemnifications say. Here's what my limitations of liability say. And then you should be able, with your customer, to have a good enough relationship to say, all right, Mr. Customer, let's figure this out, right? Let's figure out who's responsible for what and how much and when and everything else. But again, that's only half the story. The other half of the story is your agreement with CrowdStrike. Right? How does CrowdStrike limit their liability to you? CrowdStrike, I've seen their generic off-the-shelf agreement, and it's not bad, right? They start with a 12-month limitation of liability, but it's the nuances, right? It's the interconnections, it's the carve-outs, it's everything else where it really, really depends on liability. We were talking earlier about Delta Airlines, right? How much did this cost Delta Airlines? Well, Delta Airlines had to make an SEC filing saying that this is going to impact their earnings, right? Well, can you recover for lost profits? Can you recover for lost revenue? Can you recover for lost goodwill?
Lost market cap?
Yeah, it depends what the contract says. Good contracts will say no, right? They'll say no. Those are all indirect damages that you're not going to be able to recover for, Mr. Customer. You can only recover for direct damages. But again, back to the nuance, There's always carve-outs, right? Maybe there's carve-outs from their limitation of liability for breaches of reps and warranties. And maybe they had a rep and warranty that said that they were going to perform their services in a good, professional, and workmanlike manner. Maybe there was a rep and warranty that there wasn't going to be any gross negligence or misconduct, right? I'd argue something like this is gross negligence somewhere. It has to be, right? So is there a carve out from a limitation of liability for things like that, either in the MSP's contract with their customer or in the MSP's contract with CrowdStrike? And that's why you got to make sure everything flows all the way through from the vendor to you to the customer.
As it rolls downhill, each party is responsible, right? Up and downstream. And they need to line up wherever it lands. They need to have awareness, and they need to line that up with their insurance coverage, right?
Absolutely.
It determines where you need to be in terms of your insurance, your umbrella policy, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
Sorry. Go ahead, Reid.
Well, I was just going to ask a question, Eric, because so if we go down that stream, if we go from your perspective, right, would this flow all the way upstream then? I mean, I'm thinking from a tech E&O perspective for CrowdStrike.
It could. It definitely could. I think it's definitely going to be a tech E&O thing for CrowdStrike, right? I think it's a mistake that they made. I can't imagine. I obviously don't represent CrowdStrike. I don't know what their insurance coverage looks like, but I'd imagine it has to be an E&O thing for them. And the question is, do they have enough E&O insurance, right? And if not, they're going to be dipping into their pockets for things like that.
And it's funny because CrowdStrike, is a well-known name, right? They're a leader. So they have a name. I don't think, firing someone for using CrowdStrike is like, it's defensible, but they're not Microsoft. Do you know what I mean? Like if this is Microsoft, you still have all the legal things, but in terms of how the customer feels about the MSP, I think it's different because they don't really have a choice but to use Microsoft, but they have a choice to use CrowdStrike or someone else.
But do they, right? But because the MSP chooses the vendor, right? Now
I'm saying the MSP has a choice.
Oh, the MSP, absolutely.
Yeah. But they don't have a choice. They got to work with Microsoft.
That's right.
And recommend it.
Gary, you mentioned something though that I think goes back to the whole BIA point though. It's like, we didn't think of this scenario. We didn't think of the CDK scenario. And we didn't think of, the 3 or 4 others, right, that have happened over the past few weeks. But it does, hit the chord that, we have to get out of the mindset of technology-based conversations with our customers and get into business impact conversations with our customers. Does it not?
100%, Andrew. Here's my basic feeling. Do I have 3 minutes?
If this is the point you want to riff on where you're at. Yeah.
So here's how I'm starting to see it. Things moved very slowly in our industry till about the pandemic. And the reason they did was because MSPs, we really decided how fast things moved and what customers did. They went to managed services when we decided. We took them or didn't take them to the cloud when we decided. We gave them remote backup or didn't when we decided, right? And because of that, we always have our foot on the brake. And you can lag behind. But what's happened is, since the pandemic and the change in cybersecurity, threats, the customers now have changed their environments. They've made those decisions. Now that they're completely appified, they're telling us what their needs are. They're now driving. We're no longer driving. We're having to keep up. And that's a tough position for MSPs to be in. If you think about it, we had this thing where our conversations were about their network. Then they were really, about the endpoint, about the user. Now it's out to the apps. And they're just like us. We talk about how many, tools we have. They have 20, 30, 40 apps that they're using. They don't even have an inventory of them, even a small customer. And so if we don't immediately start to change the kind of conversations, and if you're like most MSPs where you're not really a VCIO, you're a captain obvious, you're an account manager. And I've had MSPs telling me their customers for the first time in many years are questioning the value because they're not talking the language and aren't trained to talk the language that customers, and now they have these big investments in software, they got to get return. They're going to get that conversation that they need from you, or they're going to get it from somebody else.
Yeah.
Now, layer on top of that all the security implications. If you don't know, like everything we've been talking about, business impact analysis. Does that make sense? How we have to change the way we're looking at this?
It makes dramatic sense, Gary, and it's interesting you say this. Just I was having a conversation. I think I've shared this a little bit here. The 2025 keynote speaker for Write a Boom is Brent Adamson, who wrote the Challenger Sale. His new book is on customer confidence, and he has done. He's a researcher. Challenger Sale. If you look at Challenger Sale, it was based on research. It wasn't like my sales ideas are this. It was tens of thousands of sales calls, right? And they got it bought by Gartner eventually. Like, they're legit. And he's done the same thing again. And to your point, business owners and MSPs think, oh, they're not confident in the MSP. And it's absolutely untrue. Those things are important. It's about, are they confident in the decisions they're making? And if they can't answer the questions internally about being confident in the decisions they're making, they're going to find somebody else who can help them with those questions to make the right decision. And so I think you're spot on in terms of how we're going to have to get better at these business conversations and help them and lead them to these answers.
That's why we're there, Andrew. Like, we're there. And that's why every time I hear, and I still hear it every single week, why don't you have MDR everywhere? Well, some customers, this or that. No, it's not the customer. It's you. Because if you took them through all the logic and you asked them all the questions about how they do business, what's important, what they could live with, how they make their money, they would make those investments. And I'll tell you one more thing. We're seeing non-recurring services as a percentage of MRR. It's slowly declining. Because project work, you only move someone from Exchange to 365 once.
Mm-hmm.
That project's not coming around again. So how do we replace that gross margin? It's going to be helping them with their new business model. Part of that is security. Part of that is BI, automation. And we'll never get there if we're not deeply involved in the technology, which is applications on how they run their business today.
Yeah, that's really well
said. It's not going to be like other things where I'm saying 5 years from now. I'm saying in the next 6 to 12 months, MSPs are going to feel it if they don't start getting deeper involved in this. I believe that.
Yeah, I agree.
Gary, just on that real quick, we when we pivoted into the channel, a lot of it was because we were seeing, MSPs didn't necessarily choose to be the risk advisor around a lot of this, but inevitably the consumer just kind of decided that, right? So from our standpoint, it was when applications started going their direction and they started, providing input around the posture, slowly but surely, MSPs were kind of put in that situation of the risk advisor, right?
Yeah.
And the way we've approached MSPs, and I know because Eric and I have gotten involved together on this, is when we're reviewing Tech E&O, for example, it's not just, hey, let's look at the application and see what the application said it's saying. There's a process, and part of that is contractual liability. And that contractual liability conversation goes through the parts and pieces of the expectations you're setting with your client, and that should flow downhill, right? It kind of keeps going. And so, we're looking at this at different levels and different tiers, but the MSP's role for who they are to the businesses they serve is continually evolving more and more and more, especially on the security and contractual components.
Yeah. And Eric, in all the years I've been in this, I've watched us change and change again. And every time, do you know where I found the answers to what to do? I'll tell you where I didn't find it. I didn't find it in a service ticket, number one. That's where I didn't find it. I found it out talking to my customers and getting deeply involved in where they were and getting pattern recognition across customers about what was changing and how they were using technology. And it always led me back to the development of services that were going to be more valuable, that they were willing to pay for. The thing is, you used to have 5 years and you could be a laggard. This is different. We have to get there now. I told all my peer members, we talked about the kind of questions they should be asking about the software that their customers are using, getting different representation from different areas of the business because they don't even know what each other uses. You know, that step beyond just the BIA, and that they had to do it in the next 6 months.
Gary, but Reid said something really interesting, and I'll let you continue in a minute. Reid, you said they became kind of their risk advisor. And again, Gary, you said, hey, you migrate them from Exchange once. And I think this window where cyber questionnaires, right, jumped dramatically in their complexity. And that forced the MSPs through the customer to get involved and dramatically increase their MRR for a window, Gary. And like you said, you're already see, you know, we have to look this through like almost like a macroeconomic lens, Gary, because if you're seeing across, you know, now coming towards 1,000 peer members, right? You've crossed over that barrier and you have significant numbers. If we're seeing NRR dropping, right? Think of this through a macro lens. That means, right? Well, what's the obvious? The obvious is those projects to get their controls aligned to frameworks and more complex security solutions are starting to drop, right? And so your point being taken well is, okay, if you're going to remain relevant and drive revenue month over month, year over quarter, year over year, you better change what you're doing, correct?
Yeah. And you better start thinking about it now and start on it because everything is a learning curve.
Yep. Good.
But again, the big thing here is the answer of where we need to be in a year lies with our customers and how they're doing business and how they're leveraging technology. They need our help more than ever.
Yep. Well
and
said.
by the way, through that process, we figure out all the security recommendations and all the compliance recommendations. They become easy.
Yeah, really good stuff. By the way, if I could just tell a quick anecdotal story, I think, Eric, your questions are next. Is that correct to Reid? Are we there?
Yep.
So just real quick, we're doing this. I was doing this interview with John Strand and Eric Woodard, and it was around the CIS controls, and we were talking about the boringest of boring controls, which are inventory, control 1 and 2. Eric goes into this customer. There are about 75 employees, Gary. And he's like, okay, look, we really got to get a handle on your SaaS applications. And they're like, nah, we're good. We're small. We probably have, I don't know, 50 different SaaS applications. They had close to 1,000. I am not kidding you. Just to give you an example, they had close to 20 different accounts of HubSpot. So to your point, again, I'm just taking one point, and they're like, you know, we have 20 corporate accounts of HubSpot. We have 3 corporate accounts of Zoom. They couldn't start. They couldn't wrap, and they were so embarrassed by this. And again, this point being, it comes back to what you're saying. They're out of touch. They've spent, you know, the sprawl and what they've done post-pandemic, and not having any controls on how people use SaaS applications and business apps in their business have run obviously crazy in some of these companies that have.
Yeah. And I read an article, there's a lot of data coming out that they're becoming less productive, not more. It already jumped the shark.
Right.
And just like MSPs, they're using 10% of every one of those apps.
Yep. All right, Mr. Tilts, over to you. Or should I say Your Honor?
Either or is very appropriate. Your Highness, Your Honor, whatever you choose. So, Reid, think about some things that have happened over the years that have really changed the landscape of insurance, cyber insurance, tech E&O. Things like Kaseya, things like SolarWinds, right? And more recent things like CDK, Snowflake, and other supply chain type attacks. And now we've got CrowdStrike, right? So do you foresee, or what do you foresee insurers are going to do in light of particularly the more recent things like your CDKs and your CrowdStrikes?
Well, it's interesting you bring up those two, particularly with Kaseya, SolarWinds, those that had not just direct impact on tech, but had a direct impact on MSPs, right? that really actually had a visceral reaction for eligibility for MSPs from 2019 to 2022, right? There was that period of massive rate increases, carriers dropping MSPs just on renewal, without notice. I don't think we're looking at that right now. And here's why. I think this has yet to play out. And also, if you look at the layers of insurance right now, you've got carriers that are kind of waiting to see what claims come in. They're aware of what, the black and white of the policy means, but they're also kind of waiting to see who's interpreting. There's the letter and there's the spirit, right, of that contract, well, Eric. So like, we're in that waiting period, but then also if you look at the layer above, that's reinsurance, right? These are the players that are placing the bets. They're the ones that are providing the capacity for these front carriers to go distribute, right? Think of them more as distributors. Of those I've talked to so far, and especially in a lot of the articles I'm reading, there's not a lot of concern there yet, especially from, they're viewing this as a non-cyber related event, and therefore they don't see a lot of claims coming in, right? But if you went like a week ago, right, you were seeing statistics around, over, 4.5 billion projected in losses for insurance. So I'm not hearing of any capacity concerns. That's usually my first, if I start to hear rumors up there, well, then those are going to start to trickle down. That said, I do think there's a couple things that we could see that I'm just going to throw some hypotheticals out there around, which is, one is, I think it was asked, why did we not see this sooner? And right now, when you look at comprehensive cyber insurance, there is a reality. Those are meant to pay claims. They were designed. They're meant to be good products. If you just want to think of it that way, they want their consumers to know this is a good product. And now there's kind of not a glaring hole, but there's certainly a void, right? So I'm very curious to see how carriers decide to handle that, because I think right now they can look at the fact they may have dependent network interruption where there is coverage, and they may decide to claw that back. And they say, this is, we need to basically, it's too hot right now. We're going to pull that specific coverage back. But I'm not seeing this be the event that's going to have a dramatic impact on the market as a whole. I don't see this necessarily being a visceral, this is going to harden the insurance market. Now, if I start to hear different rumors from, reinsurers, well, then that may.
Would after claims start to get paid?
Yeah, that's. Yeah. I mean, we saw that. We saw that when ransomware came into play. Yeah. There was kind of they're standing in the storm, going, maybe I won't get wet. But then once they started to get wet, they're running for shelter.
Eric, can I jump in and ask a quick question?
Sure.
We don't often get the chance like we have now. So if you were an MSP, one, would you be going to your insurance folks right now and saying, look, we were not affected by this. Can you take me through what if we were? And would you be going to your customers and saying to them, you need to all get involved with this is a great way to build a business relationship. Everyone needs to contact their insurance provider and ask them, what if this would have been you? Like, this is a chance for us to ask those questions, right? Isn't it?
Yeah, it's an emphatic yes and yes, right? So I encourage my clients at least once a year to have that conversation with their insurance broker, right? To say, hey, look, Mr. Insurance Broker, here's what I do for a living, right? I do this and I do this, and I use these tools, and there's professional services and there's managed services, and I resell a bunch of product and things like that. Here's the things that I've seen go wrong in the industry, whether it's impacted me or not, right? Tell me I'm covered, right? Make me feel good. Let me sleep a little bit better at night, knowing that if things go bump in the night, that I'm covered, that I do have some insurance to go back on. And the second part, absolutely have those conversations with your customers. It's the value add, right? No one else is having these conversations with your customers. You as the MSP should be, and you should be bringing in the experts like the FifthWalls of the world, even into your customer base, to make sure that they're appropriately covered.
And Gary, you bring up a good point. Like, what for those on this call, like, again, if I was an MSP, man, I would be doing a lunch and learn to all my customers, to all my prospects. Like, you talk about a differentiator
Yeah.
You know,
And you got to tread carefully, right? You certainly don't want to provide necessarily insurance advice to your customers, just like you don't want to provide legal advice to your customers, right? But bring in the experts, right?
That you took the words out.
I think it's more on not on what to do, but the questions, like what would have happened, the questions, the importance of understanding their insurance. I think just educating them about what if, and then sending them to ask the right kind of questions to their insurance team.
Yeah, because it's going to happen again.
Legal team.
There's no doubt.
And would you like to talk to us about a business impact assessment?
Yeah.
That's to me the call to action, right? Here's the questions you might want to ask. Here's the questions we're asking. I got Reid here with us, etc. So anyway,
that's how, I mean, if you look at how the comprehensive product has grown, like there wasn't coverage for bricking. There wasn't a lot of crime coverage on cyber policies at one point in time, right? There wasn't dependent network interruption that we're talking about. It's expanding, but that all had to come from somewhere. And it's not like insurers are openly just saying, hey, what else can we pay for out there, right? It's coming up from demand and them observing, hey, these are new exposures businesses are being presented with. And if we're going to stay competitive in the marketplace, we need to have a more superior product than the other guy. So I fully agree. It's a conversation that, it's kind of the rising tide that can raise some of the ships on these types of incidents.
So Reid, I'm sure you've gotten one or two phone calls in the past week or two about this CrowdStrike incident. And like you said at the beginning, it's a little bit different, right? This isn't a cybersecurity incident that arguably would have made this an easier call. And now you're talking about things like dependent network interruption coverage. I think we all kind of know what happens in a cyber liability insurance claim where your insurer is going to assign counsel, they're going to assign incident response and forensics and all that good stuff. But can you walk us through filing the types of claims that you've talked about today and what that looks like?
So and keep in mind, we service everyone, but we work with brokers. So we actually service brokers to help them service their clients. So we do consulting and provide services there. We work with MSPs, and then we work directly with end businesses and clients. So in the dialogues we're having with end clients, we're the ones that are familiar with their policy, and we're going to look through that and understand where there might be coverage, right? From their perspective, this hopefully was articulated from the beginning. In the event of a suspected event, doesn't matter. Do not hesitate. There is always a number to call, okay? So first is you can contact your agent, right? Your agent should be able to provide some level of counsel on what is and what is not. That said, unfortunately, not all agents are created equal, okay? So to go straight to the source, there's going to be a hotline on every single cyber policy. This is not I'm worried if I let them know something happened, they'll raise my rate. That does not exist in cyber. I'm just letting the whole audience know there is no penalty here associated with putting a carrier on notice, okay? In fact, there are incentive programs built in from a carrier's perspective. They want insureds to call sooner than later. They want to be notified because time is money, right? From that standpoint, they're going to go to, it depends on the carrier, but generally speaking, there's a TPA involved, right? There's a third party that's going to be doing some level of kind of like a traffic cop, right? The go, no go. They're going to be the ones that are going to have familiarity of they're going to want to get familiarity with the suspected event. So they're going to describe. Now, what I'm assuming is already occurring at the carrier level is there's already been blanket understanding and explanation with these TPAs and those that are doing the breach hotline intake on what their position is for this event at the different levels, right? So you should expect that it is kind of a traffic cop, go, no go, what are you experiencing, and so from there, really you should be following the path that's being led. Right, you should not be some sort of anxiety of what do I do next. Are they going to bring in legal? Are they going to bring in forensics, which is really not needed at this point? Probably not. I think at this point it's either going to be they understand that their form is going to have dependent network interruption, and therefore let's go ahead and move it through the process, or maybe there's still some gray area and they're going to move it over to legal. But I think that's the one thing I want to make sure everyone's aware of, it, regardless of where you are on the level, is put the carrier on notice. Typically, there's a 30 to 60 day window for these types of things, right? So when you become aware that there's a suspected event, there is a ticking clock of when you can file that claim. That's why I always tell everybody, just call, put them on notice. Say, hey, this is what happened. This is what I was looking for. I have questions. I need to understand what filing a claim looks like, and then let them start to ask the questions.
Good stuff, Reid.
Awesome.
Eric, I got a few questions for you. So you have said about cyber insurance questionnaires. I'm going to set the stage with that, right? Be careful what you do and don't do when somebody says, help me, right? So let's take a scenario. You have a co-managed customer. In essence, you just provided them CrowdStrike. You're not, you haven't baked it in your MSA, or they have CrowdStrike, let's just say, and you're not even, you haven't even provided it to them. They say, hey, you're working on you do our switching and routing. We need a lot of help. We've got people all over the place. Can you help us, with the blue screen of death, get people back online? And oh, by the way, we're trying to, remediate a lot of this stuff. Would you get involved? And by the way, when we start to talk to the insurance companies or file stuff at CrowdStrike, we'd like to kind of lean on you. And do you have to be worried? Do you have to be careful on what your statements of work say there and tiptoe there? Or is it like, sure, I'll jump in, or talk to us about that?
Yeah, and it's a good question, and this applies across the board. It doesn't matter what you're being asked to do, whether it is help, unbrick Windows devices, or whether it's to help fill out cyber insurance applications, anything like that. And the moral of the story is this, and it's pretty simple. Make sure that you are contractually liable to provide those services, right? Don't provide services outside of your existing agreements with your customers. So if your existing agreements with your customers call for you to do X, Y, and Z, don't do A, B, and C, right? Without some contract that puts you on the hook. And here's why. You want to make sure that all the services that you're doing are under a contract to make sure that your MSA applies, right? Your MSA is the umbrella under which you deliver all of your services. And it's an umbrella because it protects you from the rain, right? When bad things happen, you hold your MSA over your head and hopefully you don't get wet. So if you're not contractually obligated to provide these services, then the argument goes that your MSA doesn't apply. Right. And if your MSA doesn't apply, now you're doing work without liability caps, without warranty disclaimers, without indemnification obligations, and frankly, maybe even without an obligation from your customer to pay you for those services. Right. So just make sure that you're always contractually obligated to perform the services that you're actually going to perform.
Got it. So you have to say, hey, let's just pump the brakes. Happy to help you. Let me get a statement of work together.
And it can be simple, right? It can just be a T&M statement of work that says, hey, I'm going to help you, right? You're going to call me and I'm going to provide services to you. And when I do that, my MSA applies. That's it, right? A little one pager. It doesn't have to have deliverables. It doesn't have to have a scope. It doesn't have to have anything other than an obligation for you to perform services.
Got it. And what it's governed, like you
Correct.
said.
So, and because of that, it's a good idea to put something like that in place, whether you need it or not. Right. So at the beginning of the relationship here, Mr. Customer, sign this T&M statement of work. Right. That way, when you call me, I don't have to get out and print something off and have you sign it. I can just help you. I can just do it for you.
That's really good.
Yeah. Really good point. Other question. I know we're starting to run out of time. We got so much to cover still. Eric, just real quick. I'm an MSP. I'm running CrowdStrike. 80-20 rule. My biggest customers go, let's just say it's north of 60% of endpoints. Rip out CrowdStrike.
Yeah.
We're not, rip it out. Now, all of a sudden, I'm in a 3-year agreement. Again, it could be CrowdStrike or any vendor. Can I do anything? Because now my customers have said, I don't care what you put in, rip this out.
Yeah. At the end of the day, it's a business call. Right. And part of it depends on what your contracts say, right? Does your contract with CrowdStrike allow you to terminate whenever you want, right? How long does it take to get spun up with a new provider? What do you want to get spun up with a new provider or not? Right. They're all business decisions. And again, it goes back to the point that you're not on the hook to provide CrowdStrike services. You're on the hook to provide EDR or whatever else you're on the hook to provide. In fact, you can change out CrowdStrike if you want without asking any of your customers or telling any of your customers. You can just do it if your contracts are drafted properly. And whether
you want to be in a
not,
position where your customer's telling you what you have to do or manage.
and it's a slippery slope.
Yeah. Even if that you said to them, like, well, listen, our contract says this tools are baked in and we're under an agreement. And they say, well, we'll pay you to get out. I still don't want to run 2 tools, and I don't want them telling me that I got to change my whole thing. Like, that's an issue.
Yeah.
Right.
Because then it's going to be managed backup, and then it's going to be something else. Then it's going to be something else. Right. It's definitely the tail wagging the dog, which is why I'm saying it's a business decision, really not a legal one.
Yeah. So Gary, you even these your biggest customers, you're going to push back at them and say, hey, they're going to be, hey, look, it's like, unfortunately, a plane crash. They're going to be on it better than anybody right now. Yes.
Yeah, I would first make a decision internally, right? Like, so I'm not telling people what they should or shouldn't do, but I'm going to decide what we're going to do after this as an MSP. And then I'm going to push back hard on those customers, even if they're saying, well, hey, it's just our board, it's just our president. Get me in front of them. Because I don't think they have all the information to make a good informed decision.
Yeah.
We run our business on this. We had to make a decision. Here, let us take you through our logic. So you should always push back. But I mean, in this case, it's an issue if it's your scenario where a couple of your biggest customers push back and you're going to be running 2 different EDRs now.
Yeah. And it's no different than what happened 3 years ago with Kaseya.
Yep.
It's just rinse and repeat.
So Gary, you bring up a point where I was going to ask you a question about,
So they went to SolarWinds.
Gary, so your MSPs, you said obviously not a lot of running CrowdStrike in the peer group, but I am curious. Let's just say they're free. Hey, like Gary, what are your thoughts about ripping out a tool? Regardless, can you give us your logic on making changes wholeheartedly to tools? What are the considerations to do that?
What's funny, and we were just talking about this, another thing that's changed over the past few years is there's a lot of categories that are mature or are maturing that we deal with. They were emerging 5 or 6 years ago. And the way that MSPs used to make decisions was very technical. Their technical team would do a review and decide what tool they wanted to use. Those days are over. This is not a technical decision. This is a strategic business decision. Not to say that tech, right, shouldn't play a role in the evaluation, but it is a role. Mainly, they're looking for some red flag of why this would be an issue. And beyond those red flags, we're looking at the most strategic business decisions. I mean, it's reflected in, like, there's almost 5,000 MSPs on Kaseya 365 right now. They're sight unseen, right? There's 8 products in there. People aren't demoing 8 products, right? Because they're making a strategic business decision. So for all of these, same thing with whether to change a tool. It's all of the risk and business analysis of whether to keep a tool or whether to change it. Business, risk, commercial. So do you understand what I'm saying, Andrew? The whole way we look and make decisions has to be run from the leaders in the business now, and everyone else who's involved, including tech. They play a role, but it's not the same role that it was before when we dealt with only emerging technology. Is everybody with me on this?
It's good. No, it's great insight. Eric, I think you got a question for Gary there, and then Gary to Reid. We'll probably have that's probably as we oh, what happened to Eric's video? Did I say something, Eric?
You still there, Eric?
Still there, Eric? Huh. All right. Well, oh, there he is.
How about that? I had a question for Gary.
Yeah. Right after it's on the peer group special project.
Yeah. So Gary, I hear that you know a thing or two about.
Yep.
So Sorry. So following up, to what we've been talking about, a big peer group member running CrowdStrike has some costs associated with this incident. And they say, hey, Gary, we're ripping it out and we're going to Huntress. Is it too soon? I mean, what do you say to a customer, to an MSP peer group member like that? What do you suggest that they do?
Yeah, first thing I do is I tell them not to make any knee-jerk reactions. First, see how everything we talked about today is going to settle out. Start to talk to customers, engage, where they are. Talk to our internal team. I would take a breath, and I definitely wouldn't make some decision in the next week to make any changes, because there's no reason to right now, right? You may get there. I'm not telling people what they should or shouldn't do, but I think we don't have all the information yet, both of seeing how things play out or the reaction from customers. And I think we have some control, whether we're affected or not affected. We can use this to affect change, which is how customers think and what our relationship with them. I would focus on that, Eric.
Cool. So, Gary, I think you have one for Reid. I don't know if you can see that on where we are for cyber. Do you see that, or you want me to?
Yeah. So, Reid, kind of a little state of the union. We ask from time to time, like, hey, how many MSPs are having a conversation with every one of their customers about cyber insurance, a conversation about it? And it still hasn't been great. I want to see where you are. It's gotten a little bit better as we ask, but where do you think we are? Are MSPs getting better or realizing that this is the conversation they need to have?
I think they are, Gary. It's a slow moving, effort here. We're our business is we're a service driven business more than anything at FifthWall, right? And so part of what we're doing is a consultative approach with MSPs to move them to be proactive. That wasn't what we thought it would be originally, right? We thought it would simply be, hey, look, if you can leverage this is an opportunity, you can move into it. And it's a way that you can engage, to your points earlier, right? This is a really, really good way, not to engage just on the application, but you can engage you can move laterally in a multitude of different directions, right? And so I think, bringing the horse to water from our perspective has been really easy from, okay, that makes sense. I get it. And we talk to, we're talking to now over 2,500 MSPs, right? And it's this movement, I think, that is making a lot of sense. The what is not the issue, it's the how. And I think that's where we're seeing more evolution of MSPs going, okay, well, what is it then we need to, what behavior do we need to change? Because it is a behavioral change. And it relates to business practice, right? So you say you're doing QBRs. Are you actually doing QBRs? Great. Okay. Are you actually doing them quarterly? Right? Are we doing this in a regular cadence? Because when we're asking these questions, because we're trying to introduce something that you can leverage and be proactive on, not reactive for a multitude of reasons. So my state of the union right now is we are seeing a lot of evolution on that. We're seeing a lot of energy around it. And I think where this is headed is insurance is changing, especially when it comes to what they're like. We have cyber insurers now more and more getting into cybersecurity, right? And what they're trying to position. And so now it's getting defensive. It's not just being proactive. It's let's get defensive as well. Because we're seeing an evolution there that's, I think, forcing the issue a little bit more than it was.
Yeah, really
Andrew, I know we're up against it. I want to make a suggestion to everybody listening today. Get this recording. Have all your VCIOs listen to this, VCSOs, and then have a discussion together about what they thought about what we talked about today. And then start to workshop the kind of conversations you need to start having with your customers right now. Really, this is a training session today on the kind of, you can feel the way you need to be talking to your customers. And you got it from a couple, on the insurance and legal side, some great experts.
Yeah. And you as well, Garci. So you've been in this space for just a minute or two. So it was great. Appreciate everybody joining us in the audience. Always great chat as always. Hey, Tracy Webb, it's awesome to see you, my friend.
And let's reconvene this.
Yeah.
After things settle out and we have look back on what happened, let's revisit it when we have information.
Yeah. And Gary, I'll close it out with this. First, thanks to Reid and Eric for joining. Next week is going to be really fascinating. I don't know if you all heard about the Know Before incident where they had a spy get through their hiring. We are going to have a really fascinating gentleman on, Sandy Cronenberg, who has built a platform to do deep fakes and is a really fascinating technologist.
Andrew, get off the line with me. I have somebody else who's experienced, like, stop this, who might be a good person too.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
The more the merrier.
Really embarrassing for a company of that size, right?
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Everybody have an awesome week. Have a great rest of your July, and we'll see you in early August in a week.